I want to talk about something that makes an RTS successful in 2025 because I think a lot of people think RTS, like the reason why the older games do well today is because it's nostalgia. They don't think the gameplay loop is up to date, and in some aspects I agree with them. I think if you're trying to make RTS is like you did back in the 90s and 2000s, the chance of your game being successful, like really successful, I just don't see it. I think RTS games have the same potential roguelites and roguelikes do. Like, I'm sure you've seen how games like Hades and all these other like one-off games, and even not just roguelites, like bullet heaven games like Vampire Survivors, Halls of Torment. Those games kind of just popped out of nowhere and just started. A lot of them were getting made because it had a pretty fun gameplay loop that just came out of nowhere. I think if the RTS genre is able to find just that right mechanic or change, or maybe executing on an existing mechanic or core game mode, I think the RTS genre could see a resurgence, especially if they release it on all these different platforms. It has controller support. I like honestly, I think no one right now has peaked on what it like on the full potential of the RTS genre. And while I don't have the answer on what it is, but when I think of what draws me to RTS games nowadays, it's not the campaign. It's just a good gameplay mode. Like an example would be like StarCraft 2 co-op commanders. Um, Really great idea, not properly implemented. And what do I mean by that? There's no single player version of it. That right there alienates a large portion of the RTS scene. If you would have had StarCraft 2 co-op commanders, I would have bought all the co-op commanders. Just saying. I have not purchased a single commander in StarCraft 2 co-op commanders because of the fact that while you technically, I think, can play it, it's not balanced around it. It's not fun to play it. And that's an issue. Then you have Age of Mythology Retold, which I think kind of picked up on that with Arena of Gods. And they refined that a little bit where you do have a single player version of co-op commanders, but then they make a mistake. With Arena of Gods, there's no offline capabilities for it. The skirmishes in the campaign have offline mode, but the Arena of Gods does not have an offline segment to it. Why not? I'm playing single player. Why can't I have an offline version of that? And now we have a new game mode, which is supposedly coming out with the new Japanese expansion for Age of Mythology Retold on I think it's the 30th of September 2025. And that's more of like a roguelite mode. And I'm like, okay. If this is the way it turns out the way I think it could turn out, that could be interesting enough. Now the question is, did you make the same mistake that you did with Arena of Gods? And that is you made it so the you made it so that the single player, if you're playing by yourself, has to be online as well. It means you can't save, by the way. That's one of my biggest gripes with it, is you can't save. Well, then you still have a pretty big issue. And there's room for improvement with that formula. Honestly, if I was building an RTS game from the ground up, I would focus on obviously having a good modding support for the game as a core function. But I would also, just like for being built into the game, I would focus on having a rogue light mode where you have like a commander or factions that you level up and you unlock new commanders through gameplay. That'd be the other way I would be looking at it. So okay, you buy the expansion, you got unlock a bunch more new commanders, or maybe just Commanders might come out later and might require like a specific expansion that we've already sold, and that will come with, maybe future updates, things like that. But I wouldn't add it as potential on there. Like, I wouldn't put that a part of the, like, why you're buying it. That would just be something I would add later on my own accord. Um, but yeah, that's something, different ways you can look into it. Heck, maybe you just don't even do expansion. You just provide a bunch of free content for like a decade. Kind of like the Stardew Valley and Minecraft model. I'm not saying that's a good sustainable way, depending on how big your team is, you know, and other factors could make it possible or make it, too costly to actually do. But, something to look into and investigate. Then you have a conquest mode. Yeah, think of what's the game? Was it Warhammer? One of the Warhammer RTS games, I think, had like a conquest mode. Another aspect from a different game would be the Star Wars Battlefront games. I think it was Star Wars Battlefront 2 on the PS2, I think it was. Had like a galactic conquest mode. If you had something like that, I think would be kind of cool. And maybe go through the extra mile of like certain territories, or like all the territories have some kind of benefit. That if you control the territory, you get a specific bonus or benefit across like the whole campaign. Like wherever you're doing a battle, you get that benefit, and that could be something that would be interesting. But another thing I would look into is, we all have skirmish modes, like, skirmish type maps, but skirmish games tend to be one of the biggest areas a RTS company can improve upon without actually implementing a new game mode, and that's by offering options. The more options you offer in the skirmish game mode themselves, the more possibilities there are for replay value. Like, one such thing is, like, for the resources, depending on how your game generates resources, having a bunch of, like, let's use StarCraft 2. It should be a default option when you're selecting map to play to choose the resource value of the minerals and Vespian geysers for both the rich and the normal versions of those. And they should have like your default amount, and then you should have like maybe like a reduced amount where it's not as much, so you got to go out and gather. And another way you could do it is maybe like they regenerate over time. Like they'll go down to 1, and once they're at 1, you're just not going to get it quickly, and then they regenerate over time. So you'd be better off going to an expansion, mining that, and letting it regenerate over time. That's another one. Or just having it where like maybe like a certain percentage of those resource areas never actually run out. That's another one. So you're not mining at full capacity, but all these different options can add to the replay value and give people who prefer a certain way for their resources, for those who prefer it to run out, for those who want some of them to run out but not all of them, or people like me sometimes where I tend to play on the ones where I have such an insane amount that I will not ever effectively mine out on any of the bases. Things like that. And maybe have it where some of those bases are forever bases where they'll just never mine out, and some of them will mine out. That's another way you can go about it. Maybe, for example, the main base runs out, but maybe your natural expansion will never run out. So you're not completely able to just tank up in the biggest main part of your base. But, you would have 2 areas to potentially defend. Unless you decide to put your main base, like a lot of your structures around your natural expansion. But that's just like another way you can go about it. Another is modifiers. Positive and negative. That can be a lot of fun. You can have it where they're random. And have different tiers of modifiers as well. Don't just throw them all into one big pool. Like, for example, have less impactful ones being at like tier 1, some of the more middle impactful ones at like the middle tier, and the ones that are very extreme on both the positive and the negative be at like the bottom tier. So if you do random lower tier ones, oh, then okay, you only get the lower tier ones. So you don't want stuff, you want stuff that's interesting but not super crazy. Like I think StarCraft 2 had it where certain, was it asteroids or was it the nuclear, it might have been nukes that would just drop randomly throughout the map, besides where your natural or your main base was, I think it was, and it would just drop like crazy throughout the whole map. Some people might not like that kind of extreme modifier, so having it where you can put that in the more extreme one, it can be very beneficial and allow for a lot of replay value, a lot of tweaking of things, and maybe have it where you could have like active modifiers and passive modifiers. That's another way to do it. Separate the two categories even further. So you have the lower, middle, and higher tier. One of them, the active ones, would be like the asteroids or nukes just dropping all over the map, and more passive ones being something that like might be like, for example, in Age of Mythology, myth units require no favor. That goes all across the board. So anyone who wanted to build myth unit is only going to need either the food, wood, gold, supplies in order to do it. They're not going to require any favor to build it. That's something that could be a lot of fun. So overall, honestly, I think there's a lot of room. And I think the next person, or like the person who gets that core gameplay loop right, could see an Elden Ring moment or a Pal World moment. And for those who do not know what I mean by that, when I say a Pal World or Elden Ring moment, it's a moment where the genre, either they take the genre further, or their game is just so good that it transcends the genre. So you have people who weren't even interested in like that type of game coming and playing that kind of game. For example, the Elden Ring. There was a lot of people who never played or tried the Souls, like Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne. Tried to play them, tried to get into them, couldn't get into them, but Elden Ring clicked with them. And in some cases, they even went back to play the other Souls-like games and started beating those and, playing those. Some of them did try that and still couldn't click with them. It's not all, like, it just, completely went and allowed people to play the older games. But the fact that that kind of moment could happen is something that could theoretically happen with the RTS genre, because we have not seen everything that the RTS genre has to offer. And there might be an idea out there that you or myself have not even comprehended that could just be so good that we didn't even know we wanted it because no one else had thought about it. And then someone comes around and gives us it, and we're like, oh, wow, this is really fun. And maybe that's the game that transcends the RTS genre and brings people who never played RTS games or just couldn't get into the older RTS games and makes them fall in love with the genre. That's a possibility. So, anywho, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.